Good evening, everybody. It's very nice to welcome you all to this exciting lecture series. We are starting with a really exciting suite of talks today, Rewilding in Ireland, Theory, Scale and Practice. This lecture series has been organized by the Irish Wildlife Trust and the Trinity Centre for Environmental Humanities. My name is Katja Bruch. I'm a lecturer here in environmental history at Trinity College Dublin, and I'm going to chair this evening. We are going to proceed as follows. We'll have our three renowned speakers. They will speak each for 25 minutes. I will introduce them each individually, and after these three talks, we will have about half an hour for Q&A, and we invite you all, of course, to participate in that. Our first speaker is Eoghan Daltun. Eoghan Daltun has been living with and rewilding a 73-acre farm on the Beara Peninsula, West Cork. I guess many of you know his story. For over 16 years now. He is also a farmer and author of award-winning best-selling books like An Irish Atlantic Rainforest and The Magic of an Irish Rainforest. The floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Katja. Lovely to be here, everybody. It's a real privilege to talk to this audience and about such an important subject. And I know that in the times that we're living in, when there are such horrendous things happening around the world and such very dark things happening across the globe right now, it can be easy to take your eye off the ball with regard to what in many ways is the the gravest thing happening in our lifetimes at the present time, which is the loss, the catastrophic collapse we're witnessing across the globe in biodiversity and nature. And amongst the worst places on earth in those terms is our own country, which comes as a real surprise to many. But I'm going to step from that to telling you just a little bit about my story, because I can't take it for granted that everybody here knows it. Some of you may have read my book, others will not. And I think it's a good way to just set the scene and introduce everybody here to what we have come here tonight to talk about. So I'm from Dublin, and in 2009 I bought, as Katja outlined there, I bought a 73-acre farm on the Beara Peninsula, on the north side of the Beara Peninsula, in West Cork, near the border with the international border with County Kerry. And I just absolutely fell head over heels in love with this piece of land from the very first moment that I laid eyes on it. It overlooks the Atlantic Ocean. You can see 7 islands from where my house is now, including the Skelligs and Deanish and Scariff and a few others. You can see Carrauntoohil and the McGillicuddy Reeks to the east. But it was so the setting is indescribably special, but it was the land itself that was the particular attraction for me, because what had happened on this farm was that the family who had lived there in the past, the Crowleys, had emigrated to the United States, not all at once, but over the course of the 20th century. And the result of them moving away, and also even at when the last Crowleys were there, they were barely farming the land. And the effect that had on the land was to essentially rewild the land before the word was ever even invented. So what you would have had when this process started, if you were to go back in time to about 1900 or so, what you would have seen on the Crowley farm would have been very similar to what you see in neighbouring farms now, which is most of the land is used as pasture, so sheep or cattle, but where it's particularly rough, and in the Beara Peninsula there's a lot of quite rough land, it has just been let go, and these places have served as refugia for wild natural habitat, mainly in the form of native trees, wild native trees. With the Crowleys emigrating to the United States and ceasing farming, and when I say farming in this context, I mean livestock, because livestock are the primary way by which we as a species in this part of the world repress nature. And there's no two ways about that. And the way they do that is by eating every tree seedling and a lot of other important flora. So whether it's cattle, sheep, goats, whatever, they all do the same thing in slightly different ways, but the outcome is the same, which is that a field of grass remains a field of grass, whereas if you withdraw that factor of livestock, it turns back into, generally speaking, what it would have once been before the land was cleared for agriculture a long time in the past. And that's essentially what happened on the Crowley farm, was that the whole farm, or most of the farm, turned back into what existed on the Beara Peninsula prior to the Neolithic and the Bronze Age, which was when farming really started to make inroads on the wild natural habitat that existed there previously. So I came along and I was absolutely just overwhelmed by what I was seeing. This incredible landscape, even just from a geological point of view. So forget all of the biotic side, the living side of the ecosystem. Just these incredibly high escarpments and plunging gorges with rushing torrents when it rained heavily, massive boulders, caves into the sides of hills, knife-edge slabs, scree. So an incredibly diverse landscape, just in geological terms. But overlying all of that was this wonderful wild forest that hadn't been planted. And it's really important to emphasize that. Nobody had come along and said, we're going to create a forest here. It happened because the human influence was removed. And by human influence, I mean livestock farming. So I came along and I said, oh my God, this is so amazing. It was kind of what I was looking for, but multiplied by maybe 100 or 1,000 times. But I knew from the very start, before even buying the place, that it was in a desperate state ecologically. And the cause of that was severe overgrazing by 2 alien invasive species of herbivore. So somebody had released some goats, some domestic goats, into the area before I arrived, and they had started to replicate until there were over 100 in the immediate area. And the effect that they and another species of an invasive species, Sika deer, had on the ecosystem was to completely arrest that process of reversion to nature by doing essentially what sheep and other livestock do, which is removing every single native tree seedling and all of the other ground floor in the forest as well. And what that was also doing, so the forest wasn't able to reproduce, and of course, if a forest ecosystem can't reproduce for long enough, over time, it just starts to fade away as trees age and die with nothing to replace them. The forest just starts to peter out, and that's what was happening in my place when I arrived. The overgrazing was also creating the ideal conditions for takeover by a whole bunch of invasive plant species. And the worst of the whole lot, of course, was one called Rhododendron ponticum. So huge areas of the forest were getting taken over by this and 7 or 8 other invasive plant species. So I set to work as soon as I arrived and applied for a grant to fence out the goats and the sika, and also got to work clearing the rhododendron and the other invasive plant species. After a year and a half, contractors, my application was approved, contractors came in and put up a 6-foot-high deer fence to keep out the goats and the deer. And by this stage, most of the invasive plant species were either gone or more or less under control. Over the following years, I just saw this kind of miracle, and I know that's possibly a word that's, bandied about, but it really was the most incredible thing to see what happened in the years afterwards as the ecosystem came to life. So you started to see tree seedlings springing up everywhere, as they had been all along, but they were just getting immediately eaten. But because that pressure had been removed, those tree seedlings were able to continue growing and developed into little trees this big and this big and this big. And within 5 or 6 years, some areas where you had no forest, that had been just sterile grasses, they had transformed into young, closed canopy native forest within that short a space of time. You also had the ground flora just come to life. So a whole range of different species, wildflowers, bluebells, wood anemone, lesser celandine, primrose, herb robert, scores of different species that I had just presumed didn't exist in the place, all started to appear in small patches at first, but over time you started to get whole carpets forming. A great variety of ferns and other species of ground flora. The whole place, in botanical terms, started to come to life. And of course, all of this attracted in increased abundance and diversity of invertebrate life, which in turn had a knock-on effect in bringing in more bird life. And you even got several rare species of native mammals moved in. So the first to show up were lesser horseshoe bats, which are a species of international conservation concern. And they established a colony in a shed I had. And then pine martens moved in. And otters started showing up, coming up the streams from the nearby sea, as the increased health of the ecosystem offered more and more reason for them to come up. And it was such a wonderful thing for me to see and play a part in, and it was an incredibly joyous thing in my life. The other side of all of this, though, was real pain. And the reason why that real pain was there was because, having seen what nature can do when we let it, how easy it is to create the conditions or to remove the things that we have done, the artificial conditions that we have imposed that prevent nature from returning. It's so easy to take those away with a little bit of tweaking, and nature comes back on a scale that's almost beyond belief. That when you've seen that and you go out of that small little place that is my farm and you cross the country, what you see is desolation across Ireland. Because the truth is, and I saw it this morning, coming up from Beara, sitting on the train, looking out the window, what you're passing through is one giant livestock farm, which is either cattle or, in our uplands, sheep, and you've got some sheep in the lowlands as well, and very often the only interruption, apart from hedgerows, which are getting grubbed out at a ferocious rate, according to some estimates, up to around 6,000 linear kilometres per year are being removed, and these are very often the last refuges that wildlife has in an otherwise desolate landscape, in an otherwise nature-free landscape. The only forest that you'll see very often is blocks of non-native Sitka spruce or other exotic monocultures. So things could scarcely be worse in Ireland. But I think the thing that we have, the story that we have to tell, is the way that could be so much different. And it really could. In preparation for the book that I'm working on, I went to Costa Rica at the start of this year. And the reason why I was interested in going to Costa Rica was that I was aware that of all the countries on earth, it has probably had the greatest success in reversing nature loss. So Costa Rica had the worst rate of deforestation in all of Latin America up until around the mid-80s. And they went down to somewhere around 21% remaining forest cover. It was happening faster than anywhere else south of Mexico. And then the government turned around and they did two things. The first thing they did was to place a prohibition on any further logging of the forest. So they just said, you're not allowed to cut down any more natural forest, period. But the other thing that they did, which was possibly even more important, and certainly from an Irish perspective, really, really important and illuminating, was that they brought in a scheme whereby farmers and other landowners had the option, and the word option is key here, so nothing was forced on anybody. They just said, look, you can do this if you want. They said, we will pay you to bring back nature on your land. And they financed this by placing a tax on gas, what they call gas, because they use kind of American terminology, what we would call petrol or diesel. So any kind of transport fuels, there was a kind of like a 2 or 3% levy added to pay for this scheme, which was called the Payments for Ecosystem Services Scheme. And there was massive uptake across Costa Rica. By chance, the cattle industry was going through a bit of a downturn. Beef prices were low. It wasn't working for a lot of cattle ranchers. But also, this scheme offered very obvious and attractive benefits for a lot of people who are farmers, because farming is a tough business, and I know that. I can say that firsthand, having done it. On the farm, part of my farm was Mountain Commonage, and I had sheep up there for 5 years, and I don't have them anymore. I have Dexter cattle now, but I know how tough farming is as a business. Even though I don't think my neighbours would, I think they would laugh at the idea of myself calling myself a farmer. But I do know what it's like to have to go up to the top of a mountain carrying tools in the middle of an Atlantic gale to fix a fence that your livestock have busted through into somebody else's land, and you've got a phone call saying your animals are in my place, do something about it. It's tough work, and it's expensive. You have to spend a lot on fixing fences, on vets, on all sorts of other things. It's hard work, and there's no let up. You can't have a holiday from farming, really. Not if you're a serious farmer. I do. I managed to find time to go away. But in Costa Rica, a lot of people said, you know what, that would actually quite suit me. And they opted for this ecosystem payments for ecosystem services scheme. And it's been a spectacular success on every conceivable metric, in every conceivable way. So natural habitat has gone from a low of around 20%, as I said, back up to around 65%, and it's still going up. But the important thing here is that it's worked for society across the board. Costa Rica has become one of, if not the best economy in Latin America, and perhaps more importantly, it has the best quality of life, the best standard of living. And it was done in a way that was completely non-conflictual. So nothing was forced on anybody. People were given options. At the moment, Irish farmers don't have options. If you've got rough land in a place like Beara, you either stick sheep on it, which leads to a dead zone, and let's be clear on that. Our mountains are dead zones, or you plant it with Sitka spruce, which leads to another type of dead zone. Those are your options. The option of gaining a livelihood through something that brings back nature just does not exist. So the thing that I and I know Pádraic, I'm sure Mary as well, so the next two speakers after me, I know that they're, and the Irish Wildlife Trust as well, we're all great advocates for giving farmers those kind of options which they presently don't have. The other thing I'd say about, and I really wanted to kind of introduce tonight's event, but you know, and the other speakers will go into more depth about some of this stuff. But what I would also say is that while rewilding is barely happening in Ireland right now, and things look really, really dark for Irish nature right now, I do sense a change of mood. I feel that people in Ireland have had enough of the way things are in watching nature go down the tubes in their country, and the idea that if you want to experience real wild nature, well, you have to go somewhere else to see it. You know, people are tiring of that. They're growing increasingly angry of that. So my feeling is of two very strong forces that are now starting to push against each other, because there are strong forces that are pitted implacably against any sort of change. And when I say any sort of change, I mean even that much, because they see that as a threat. They see that as the crack in the dam that if it widens, God knows where it'll stop. But as I say, more and more people want change, and it's hard to see what way that's going to play out over the next few years. But my sense is hopeful. And what I would say is that, as well as Costa Rica, I also visited Scotland more recently over the summer, where I toured around speaking to people who've been involved in rewilding in Scotland over the last decades. And Scotland it feels like it's light years ahead of Ireland. Like the two nations have so much in common on so many different levels in terms of landscape, ecology, culture, history of colonialism. Even the place names, a lot of place names in Scotland are of Gaelic derivation. But they're so far ahead of us in terms of bringing back nature on a scale that's just, you couldn't even put a figure on it. I know what I can tell you is that it's estimated that right now, and this is accelerating rapidly, about 2.1% of Scotland is being rewilded. I would say that's probably thousands of times what's being rewilded in Ireland. But I'll just leave you with this final thought, which was that a lot of the Scottish rewilders that I spoke to, people who've been working at fighting at the coalface for decades, said to me, don't lose heart, because things can change very quickly. If you go back in time by only 5 years, 10 years in Scotland, it felt like they were getting nowhere. But what was in fact happening was that the conditions were aligning for rapid change to just start to just, once the dam breaks, things can really change very, very rapidly. And that was the message I got from Scotland. So I'll just finish on that note, because I know that it's past, and I'm really looking forward to hearing everybody else speak and the questions and answers. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Eoghan, for your hopeful and inspirational introduction to this evening. Our next speaker is Mary Reynolds, a reformed landscape designer who originally launched her international career by achieving a gold medal for garden design at the Chelsea Flower Show in London in 2002. The story of which was made into a 2016 movie called Dare to be Wild. She's a best-selling author, activist, speaker, writer of the wildlife gardening column in the RTE Guide, and an occasional TV presenter. She's the founder of the global movement Are the Ark, acts of restorative kindness to the earth, and her aim in life is to restore the earth's native plant and creature communities, and to remind people that our role here on this beautiful home is not that of a gardener, but that of a guardian. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. I won't keep you too long. What is it our dad used to say, Eoghan? That was a really funny thing he used to say at the beginning of speeches. Oh yeah, as Henry VIII used to say to his wives, I won't be keeping you long. Anyway, so I used to be a garden designer, and I kind of have slowly been writing and talking my way out of a job. And the kind of final moment, the last nail in the coffin, I suppose, came in 2018 in winter. I was living in a rented house in Wexford, I was trying to build a house on the family farm. And I was sitting at the desk one day looking down. The kids had gone to school, and I was sitting at the desk looking down over the lawn as such, and I saw a fox run past. And chasing the fox were a couple of hares, which in itself was a bit unusual. And so I kept watching the brambly patch they ran into, and seeing if they'd come back out. And I saw a hedgehog running in the same direction. And I thought, this is weird, it's like Noah's Ark or something, So I went out to see where they were coming from and what were they running away from. And I went down the end of the lane. I lived in a country, it was a country lane, and it's a real small little road at the end, and on the far side was this real strong kind of brambly emergent woodland. It was a thicket of a field, It was like Sleeping Beauty's Wall of Thorns. You couldn't get into it, and I loved it because it had real strong energy, it had a real energy to it. But somebody had got planning permission to build a house at the top of the field, and they'd gone in with a digger and they'd cleared it out within moments to make a garden, without any thought for the creatures that called it home. And I stood there and I thought, feck it anyway, I have done this myself so many times. And that was the end of that, So I went back in, I started researching the collapse of nature, and I realised, Jesus, we're screwed altogether. I didn't realise it. And what I started to realise was that we're losing the natural world patch by patch. And everybody is waiting for someone else to fix it, but we're all watching it fall apart patch by patch. And each one of us that has a garden is part of that patchwork. And I've been responsible for a lot of it, so I put my hands up, but what I have to say today is hard for people to take in, like, you know, and I know now I'm probably speaking to the converted in this room, but even with that, I know people find it very hard, what I have to say. So please forgive me. Like, you know, we went from 80% coverage, and I know it's taken a long time, like, you know, and people always like to blame the English, but sure, the English, we got rid of them a while ago, lads. We haven't planted any more trees, you know, but we've gone from that to this now is what we consider beautiful. I mean, where would you be going? I mean, I know this is an absolutely awful example, like, but, you know, it was in a hotel that I had a meeting in recently. Do you remember, Owen? That was the state of it, like, I swear to God, I couldn't believe it, like, I was like, are we still at this crack, like, you know? And, you know, our concept of beauty is just gone so far up our own holes, it's just unbelievable. I mean, we have this real need to embrace our heritage and our culture, you know? But never mind our native plants, apparently they're not important at all. Where actually they're the foundation stone of everything. They're the foundation stone of all life on this planet, our native plant communities. And we have all become colonizers. And I know that's a hard thing to say to an Irish person, but each one of us that has a garden has torn the native life out of it. Every bit of it has been torn out, and we've supplanted back in non-native plants because we think they're pretty. What are we at, like? So I kind of started to really think about this, and I was looking at everything suddenly differently, going, is this what we call natural? Like, how is this natural? Like, you know, it's kind of bizarre, really. Like, when you come over to my side of the fence now and you see a garden, you go, what in God's name is that? Like, you know, I can't look at them anymore. And unfortunately, all the current narratives that we're being sold are completely there to support the horticultural industry or the energy industry. All of the narratives we're being sold as solutions are there to support industry. They're not there to support the natural world. You know? I mean, all we hear about is pollinator-friendly plants, right? And I love the Irish pollinator plan. It's fabulous. Except they have this bit in it that you should plant this list of non-native pollinator-friendly plants. Now, that isn't a great way to go because everyone looks at the pollinator plan and they only see this bit, and that's what they do, and then they think they're part of the solution. This is not a solution. This is a garden industry supporting narrative. Like, let me go back to this for a minute. So, like, there's this amazing entomologist. How much time have I got? All right. Amazing entomologist in England called Dave Goulson. I don't know if any of you have come across him, like. And Dave, he did these experiments in 2017 where he took a range of plants, that pollinator-friendly plants and bee and butterfly-friendly plants from across garden centres in the UK, you know, and he tested them. And they were a toxic soup of chemicals, like. And they were sickening and killing the insects that came to feed from them. And this is what we're buying in our garden centres, you know. Unless they're organic, they're only doing damage, like. They are treated with chemicals from seed to sale, you know. And unless they're native, they're not helping, like, I don't know. Like, one of the other things that drives me absolutely spare is that we should be planting for climate change. You know, bringing the southern plants up because things are changing, it's getting warmer. They haven't a bog's notion what they're talking about. If AMOC, you know, if the Atlantic current collapses, we're going to be more like Iceland or Finland, like. And that, they've actually kind of just basically admitted that's going to happen, like. You know, so planting for climate change is another industry supporting narrative. What we need to be doing is supporting the native plant communities to come back, you know, not sticking in more colonial thinking, like. I'm flying through this now because I'm afraid of going too long, so and I'm sure there's other things that come up. But keeping hives is another thing people think they're doing to help nature, you know. I mean, there's 77 solitary bees and 21 bumblebees and one native black bee in Ireland, right? And, you know, if you keep hives, there could be 80,000 bees in that hive, and then they're going around and they're taking all of the tiny little bit of resource that's left for all the bees, and all the bees get pushed back, apart from the honeybees, and you're causing a collapse of all the other populations. Like, what is that like? I mean, I don't know. Anyway, so I came up with this concept of We Are the Ark, and I called it Acts of Restorative Kindness to the Earth in case anybody thought I was a religious lunatic. So all around the world now there's people who have arks, and it's just like rewilding. And what I say to the people, look lads, if you want to save the planet, start with your own patch of it, or else just stop talking like. So take whatever patch you have and build it back into a native plant community, build back habitats. The most important patches are like places like Owen's Place, right? Because they're where all the seeds of restoration are. Without them, we are completely screwed. But in the meantime, we have to build seed banks. And kind of like arcs are like they're kind of like little revolutions against the system that's trying to kill everything on the planet, you know? They're like little areas of revolution. And we need a revolution because none of the solutions are going to come from the top down, lads. The politicians are not going to save us, let's face it. They've proven that now. And if anybody is still waiting for that, we're screwed altogether. Like, I say that line a lot. But all of the greatest changes in the world have come from the bottom up. None of them have come from the top down. From small movements of people, like the people in this room who've had enough and who want to build a better change, a better life, a better world. And we're not going to have a future if we don't get together and build change. And all of the solutions are local, because all of the destruction is local to someone. And all of us have to look around and go, how are we going to tackle this? Like, which farmers are pumping sewage in here? Which councils are pumping, sewage in here? Where are these chemicals coming from? We all need to build communities around restoring and protecting our land. We need to build communities around growing food. You know, we're not going to solve the planet with electric cars, lads. You know, that is not a solution that's going to solve anything. That's a sideways movement. That's staying in the system that's killing everything on the planet. You know, I mean, if you want to go and live on Mars with Elon Musk, please go, you know. But the rest of us want to stay here and build back what is absolutely the Garden of Eden. Sorry for the reference to whatever. But we have the most incredible, magical planet here, and we are destroying it. And we're all responsible. If you have a garden, and it's full of non-native plants, lads, you need to think again. And it's not like I'm giving out to you now, but I am. But, you know, but I do want you to go home and look like. We go all over the world to visit places of natural beauty and nature, and then we come home and we surround our gardens with the most unnatural outdoor rooms that are filled with plants without any life, that don't support life, you know. How are we doing? Okay. Yeah, so gardens are greenwashed, basically, you know. I mean, the amount of chemicals being used in gardens is bizarre. It's just incredible. And we equate tidiness with care, you know, and that's where it's all gone wrong, is that we're afraid of, like, the parish priest coming in or something, or the neighbours looking over and seeing that it's messy because they'll make judgments about us, you know, but that needs to change. We need to realise that caring is about taking care and supporting nature to come back, because nature can't survive without us anymore. People often say this thing to me like, oh, sure, nature will be grand if we get rid of the humans. Like, it's such a bizarre thing to say, because we're integral to the recovery of the natural world, like, and especially in our little patches, like, because like if we got wiped out in the next 6 months, depending on how the Orange Man gets on, but if we did get wiped out, you know, Ireland, within a certain amount of years, I don't know how many years, but Pádraic and Eoghan might know how many years, like, would be completely covered in Japanese knotweed, cherry laurel, rhododendron ponticum, and Himalayan balm, maybe, you know. And because the native plants are the foundation stone of life, that would wipe out everything else, you know. That's what I was talking about, the invasive non-native species. Every single garden centre, front and centre, is cherry laurel. It drives me spare, like, every landscaper pushes cherry laurel as the hedge of choice because it's evergreen, it grows quickly, looks fabulous. Then NPWS has stated that rhododendron ponticum and cherry laurel are the biggest threat facing our remaining woodlands, and yet they're pushing it in every garden centre. Like, where is the joined up thinking there? You know? And why isn't that happening? I mean, I've said it to a number of ministers, I don't know about ye, but it doesn't seem to get beyond that. It's like there's no political will to save the planet. Where are we going to go, lads? This is the most important subject. The most important issue facing us is having a livable planet. Like, what else is there? Like, the other problems would be problems we want to have when we're faced with a planet that can't support us anymore. You know, how we do? Okay. So yeah, I was given out about the normalisation of chemicals in the gardening industry. So even in bulbs, you know the way people go mad into planting bulbs? Bulbs are soaked in toxic chemicals to stop mice eating them in storage, you know? And all of these crazy notions we have of supporting pollinators. I mean, this idea that we think that nature isn't an intelligent system and isn't intelligent enough to provide the range of food that the pollinators need through the systemic, or the kind of, I've forgotten the word because of my menopause brain. There's a word about things that follow after each other. What's that word? Sequential run of native flowers that support the pollinators, you know. And we're always going on about pollinators. Anyway, arking and rewilding, it's all the same thing. It's just that arking is rewilding on a small scale. To do proper rewilding, what you'd need, 1,500 acres or something, and you'd have to be bringing back the wolves. I don't think the wolves would do well in a suburban garden in Temple Ogue, for example. So the idea is that we have to step in and carry out all the ecosystem services in our tiny little patches that are missing because of the missing creatures. So what I ask people to do is to design themselves into the landscape you design their families and themselves into the landscape in a way that creates disturbance of basically layers of ecosystem maturity. Sounds complicated, but it's really, really easy. All it is having, depending on how much space you have, trying to create as many layers as possible of native plant communities. So you have woodland, scrub, you have all the different types of layers of meadow, the short meadow, the thatched meadow, the flowery meadow, and then you have bare earth. All of these things are really vital for creatures at some level, and so we have to kind of provide them for them. And then in between you create habitat, things like ponds and deadwood and piles of stones and all that sort of crap. So ecotones and edges is what we're looking for in small spaces, because all of the life lies between about a metre either side of two different kind of ecosystems. So because there's more diversity in there, so there's more life in there. So life is on the edge, So the more edges you can create, the better. And why do native plants in gardens matter? So native plants are the thread, basically, and you are the needle, right? Because everyone goes on about pollinators, which are obviously very important, but most of the energy in the food web is driven by caterpillars, larvae. And we don't consider them at all, because do you know what they need? They need native plants. And the industry has to be forced into providing native plants. But it's not as simple, it's not as it's just that, like, over millennia, plants and insects have evolved alongside each other. Plants don't want to be eaten. They're full of chemicals because they don't want to be eaten. So insects have focused their attention. And most insects are specialists. And then about 10, 15% or something is generalists. They can eat more plants. But the insects can only eat a few different types of native plants. Sometimes they'll adapt to eat non-native plants, but they don't do well on them. They need the native plants. And if you're going to try and get a bird to raise a clutch of chicks, they'll need thousands and thousands of caterpillars. So you ever see the mum and dad, they're going out and out and out and in and in and out and out and out, for weeks, feeding these hungry little buggers, And then should they leave the nest, and then they act like teenagers for another couple of weeks, but still demand to be fed. They're exhausted, And what they feed them is caterpillars and spiders. They don't go to the bird table and collect a few peanuts, They look for squishy baby food, and that's what the birds prefer themselves, Anyway, how are we doing? Okay. And trying to understand that nature is a partner in rewilding, arking design, because every square foot of healthy soil has 5,000 weed seeds, right? What we call weed seeds are native herbs, and they only need 1/30 of a second's worth of light to activate. And if you're lucky and your seed bank is not full of non-native invasives, then work with what's there, and try and collect seeds from your local area. because not only have plants and insects evolved alongside each other nationally, they also have local adaptations, evolutionary adaptations. So you can't, like best practice is to collect seed which is of the area within about 15 miles. And that's difficult in the city. So just do your best, like. But if you're going around and collecting seed, like, bring a little book with you, or a little plant app, or both preferably, and try all year to collect seed and try and grow them in plugs, in trays, because it's the best way to get them into your spaces. And the more diversity of native plants you have, the more life you're supporting. So it's a bit like gardening, except you're gardening with a different intention. Your intention is to support as much life as possible, not just to have a pretty space. Because the earth is like the embodiment of the feminine energy, and women are really tired, like the earth is, of only being valued for being pretty or productive. You know, we've had enough of that. You know? And the land needs to be valued. Like, all the way through history, we always knew. We were always told, and the myths are messages to remind us that if we don't look after this place, if we don't take care of this place, it'll become the wasteland. When you get out of balance, everything is going to fall apart. Nature needs it to be at the core and centre of every decision made. And that's the only way we're going to manage. Anyway, how are we doing? We've got another, 8 minutes or something? So things like wildflower meadows, basically, you know, don't be buying those stupid packets of wildflower meadow seeds. Like, that's just rubbish. Like, you know, you need to work with the seed bank and add in seeds that you can. But there are some really good seed suppliers now that are actually, they're specific to sites like Eco Seeds and True Harvest Seeds and Sandro, Cafola, you know. So there are some people around who are doing that anyway. Yeah, and think about, like, if you ever drove, you know, it drives me mad driving up from Wexford and driving along the motorway, and you just see these concrete barriers in the middle of the road, and you think, God love them, like, if they get halfway across the road, if they're lucky enough to get halfway across, they can't go any further, like. We really have to learn how to share, like. There's 31,000 estimated other species in Ireland, like, and we act like we are the only ones here, you know? It's bizarre, like we're tearing nature out patch by patch, hedge by hedge, farm by farm, garden by garden, and we're waiting for someone else to fix it. And it doesn't have to be that way. Like, in this whole big farm, kind of industrial farmland, an ark could become like a really safe sanctuary for wildlife. And instead, it's just another bloody garden. It's a desert for wildlife, you know? So if you want to be part of the solution, then develop habitat and native plant communities. And, like, I stand on stages at garden festivals and with sustainable gardeners and that kind of thing, you know. And it's amazing, like, you know, they always say at the end of me rambling on, oh, but I love my plants. And I'm looking at them going, are you bloody kidding me? Like, I mean, which bit of that did you not get? Like, you know? I mean, if I was up here saying, lads, we have to stop using oil, like, and at the end of the conversation, oh, but I love my oil heater. And you'd be going, come on, lads, like, you know. If you really want to save the planet, start with your own patch of it. It's as simple as that. It's very obvious, but as simple as that. I'm nearly done. Lighting, big thing you can do. So, like, we've lost, 75% of wildlife populations since the 70s, since the industrial revolution or the green revolution of agriculture, you know, forestry, fishing, or everything just got torn to shreds, like. But lighting is one thing that everybody can do, you know. Close your curtains, get rid of your outdoor lights. You know, if you have to have an outdoor light, turn it into a really, like, yellow or a red bulb. So basically you're aiming for the red light district, you know, because they don't upset the insects as much. And make sure they're downward facing if you have to have them. If you have to have one on the way in, like if you got, you know, worried about getting from the car to the house or whatever version of events it is, put on one of those motion sensor things, but turn it off when you get in, you know, because then it's not going on and off all night and upsetting the birds and waking them up and confusing them. Moths go round and round and round and around lights, and they think that it's the moon, and they get worn out and die, basically, by the morning. Our predators hang out by the lights waiting to catch the moths because they know what's happening, like, you know. But it's not just moths. So many creatures are absolutely destroyed by this crazy idea that we have to light everything up, to move away from that. It's one easy fix, There's a wonderful activist called Leanne Foe, and she has my favourite quote, which is, "The sign of a healthy economy is drinkable rivers." Like, do you remember that, when you used to be able to drink rivers, like? And, okay, how many more? 2 more minutes. Okay, I'll shut up soon then. So simple things like, think about all the things you've been told, like tidy up the stems now, leave them standing over winter, because a lot of the insects finish their life cycle in the stems. Leave the seed heads for the birds and the field mice and the shrews. That's their winter pantry, and we keep tidying it up because that's what we've been told. And I ask people to grow food in their arks, so half for food, half for nature, half earth. It's not much to ask, And if you've more than enough land to grow food, then share it with people who don't have any access to land, and build communities around growing food, because building arks is really about growing communities on all different levels. So people send me pictures from all over the world of their ark sign, because I'm not selling them anything, which is very confusing for people. And they have to make their own signs. And there's 25,000 people in the ark group now from all over the world, and they're all sharing their ark stories. And it's so heartening, because the harvest from building an ark is hope. Because you see, like Eoghan was saying, how quickly, with a little bit of support, nature can recover. And you think, okay, we're not completely. And you keep going. And that's what's important, because if you were to look around, you think there's no point. But if you wrap your home and your world in our true nature again, you're restoring our true heritage, our hope comes back. And you don't have to go to a beach in Bali to hang out and do yoga and experience the natural world. You can just step outside your door. Okay, so top-down change is never going to happen. And yeah, that's all great. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Mary. I've long waited for a discussion about the garden as a wasteland in Ireland, and you really speak to my heart, and I guess to many people who feel similarly. Our final speaker this evening is Pádraic Fogarty. He is an ecologist and author of the 2017 book Whittled Away, Ireland's Vanishing Nature. He was a campaign officer for the Irish Wildlife Trust, and in 2025 he launched the website rewildyourland.ie for landowners in Ireland who want to rewild. Of course, yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Eoghan and Mary, and to the Irish Wildlife Trust. This event's booked out in hours, I think. Eoghan, am I right in saying hours? Right. This tells me how really popular rewilding is, and this gives great inspiration for people like me who wonder sometimes, is anybody out there, So it's really encouraging to see so many of you here. So rewilding is really popular, but what is it exactly? Rewilding as a word started back in the 1990s in the USA. And of course, the USA is known for its very big landscapes, its deserts and its mountains and so on. But it had suffered a lot of ecological damage. And ecologists in America said that what nature needs to thrive are what they call the 3 C's. So these were core areas of nature, carnivores, because even though America had these big spaces, they had eradicated an awful lot of their carnivores, and carnivores, as we know now, play a critical role in the ecosystem. And corridors, so that animals could migrate and could be connected between one area and another. But But it wasn't until maybe 2013 when I think rewilding became very popular on this side of the Atlantic, and that's thanks to a journalist and author called George Monbiot. He wrote a book called Feral, and certainly was my first experience with rewilding and learning about rewilding. And I remember reading that book and I thought, oh my God, this now makes sense. You know, why are we looking at these hills and these fields in Ireland thinking that they're healthy and wild and full of nature when they're the exact opposite? So I think at that moment, rewilding became very popular. There was George Monbiot did a TED Talk that has been seen very many times. There was also this video about how wolves change rivers, which you might have seen on YouTube. And this was about the cascading effects that wolves had when they were reintroduced into Yellowstone National Park. And of course, this was coming at a time when the news about our climate and biodiversity was getting worse and worse. So I think rewilding really captured the public imagination. But in many ways, I think it has maybe captured too much of our imagination. So we see rewilding used an awful lot in all kinds of things. This is a headline from a couple of years back about how the Catholic Church was going to rewild 30% of their land. And as Mary was saying, you know, it's really important that every bit of land is used to boost nature. But is it really wilding if it's just a small patch of land? Is it really capturing what we're trying to achieve by restoring big areas of wild landscapes? We also see a lot of this. This is a headline from the Guardian newspaper, and again, it's talking about a transformative example of rewilding in England. And I mean, if all you can see in that picture is plastic tubes, I mean, that's all there is plastic tubes. And really what this was saying was that rewilding is not about us planting trees. It's about us acknowledging that forests, if that's what the end goal of this is about much more than trees. It's about fungi, it's about insects, it's about smaller plants, mosses, animals, the whole dynamic network that we call an ecosystem. We also see some fantastic examples of bringing nature back into the cities. This is a wonderful animal called a beaver, which I think would be great in Ireland. Maybe we need another seminar on that one, Irish Wildlife Trust. Can you do rewilding in cities? Certainly you can do a lot to bring nature into cities, but it's not really capturing, again, what we were talking about. And we also found that once rewilding became popular in the public imagination, the alarm bells started ringing in marketing departments all over the world, and they thought, we need to get in on this and we need to start slapping rewilding on our projects. And again, this was a brand of juice that were sending people out packets of seeds to broadcast wherever they wanted to. Lord knows where these seeds were coming from. This is not rewilding. And here we have 5 simple ways to rewild your skin if that's what you want to. So if anything had demonstrated, okay lads, rewilding is great and all, but let's rein it in a little bit. And I think what happened, this really did rewilding a disservice, because I started hearing a lot, well, rewilding doesn't actually mean anything. And I still hear this all the time. Rewilding means nothing. If putting up bird boxes or going without makeup for the weekend is rewilding, then what's the point of it as a word? So I think it's really important that we do everything we can for nature, but that not everything we might do for nature is rewilding. And there's a good reason for that. And that's because rewilding, to my mind, is the quickest, simplest, and cheapest way of addressing both the biodiversity and climate crisis at the same time. We can do it over large areas. We can do it with nature's help. It's not going to cost a fortune. It's not like inventing technologies that don't exist. The UK said this year they were going to give, I can't remember the figure, several billions of pounds for research in carbon capture. To invent machines that don't exist and which research shows that doesn't work for doing this, when we know that nature is the best carbon capture technology that we have. So I also want to really use this opportunity to say that rewilding does actually mean something. And here's the IUCN, is the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. And they have been taking this idea of rewilding seriously. You know, these are the authority. There are hundreds of governments and scientists and NGOs are involved in the IUCN. So if they're taking it seriously, well then it most surely means something. We've also seen that rewilding has taken off, particularly in Europe. I often hear that rewilding is great for North America or Africa or places that have big spaces with lots of wildlife. But actually, rewilding has probably had its greatest success in Europe. This is from Rewilding Europe, which is a fantastic organisation, is operating in many countries across the continent. And it's saying that rewilding is a progressive approach to conservation. It's about letting nature take care of itself, enabling natural processes to shape land and sea, repair damaged ecosystems, and restore degraded landscape. So what they're getting at there is not that rewilding is about doing nothing. This is another one of the big criticisms I hear all the time, that rewilding is about closing the gate behind you and forgetting about somewhere. And as Mary pointed out, that's simply not an option. We have too many problem species. We have done too much damage to our country to simply walk away. So rewilding is going to involve an awful lot of work by us. But the idea is not that we have to go back every year and do the same work over and over again. The idea is that we're getting nature back up on its feet so that the long-term objective is that nature can look after itself. And we know that nature can look after itself if the circumstances are right. I also want to show you this, not that I expect you to read this, but rewilding has established itself in the scientific community. For at least 10 years now, we've had a steady stream and an increasing number of scientific papers that have looked at rewilding. And we get debates about, well, is rewilding the same as ecological restoration? What is the difference between different things? And there are differences, and maybe they can be subtle. Sometimes it's like a Venn diagram looking at these different words and how they can apply. But I think rewilding brings us back to the primacy of nature being able to look after itself. And I think this is something that is hard for people to get their head around, particularly in Ireland, because from the years that I've been working in this field, I've often heard, but look, none of this stuff about wild nature or natural ecosystems applies to Ireland because we've been farming it for so long, we got rid of our forests, we've lost our wolves. This stuff doesn't apply to us anymore. And I might have some time for that argument if we had clean rivers and healthy populations of bees and butterflies and healthy bogs and all these other things in our countryside, but we don't. We don't have any of these things. So I think it's important to recognise that Ireland, despite our best efforts, hasn't broken free of the rules of nature. They still apply here. And I think if we want to address our biodiversity and climate crisis seriously, we need to look at going back to those first principles, restoring rivers in a naturally functioning way, making sure our forests are big enough so that they're self-sustaining and can evolve, making sure our bogs are healthy enough to grow peat again, and making sure our oceans are full of fish and full of wildlife. So this has very much scientific foundations. This is a selection, again, of academic books. There's a lot of popular literature. I guide you to Owen's books about the Atlantic rainforest for a particularly Irish angle, but there's a lot of popular literature about rewilding. But here's a selection of very much academic-centred books about why rewilding needs our attention. Now, for anybody wondering why Ireland needs rewilding, I'll show you these two diagrams here. The one on the right comes from our National Parks and Wildlife Service. And the red splodges that you see are what they call ancient and long-established woodlands. So these are our oldest patches of native forest in Ireland. And when this diagram was published in the report, it came with the caption that the dots were artificially enlarged so we could see them. So basically, we went from 80% forest in Ireland, which is proven through pollen records, down to barely visible flecks on our landscape. And even those, as Eoghan is blue in the face pointing out, even these areas that we know are the vital seed banks and repositories of biodiversity are not protected. Some of them are nominally protected, lots of them aren't even nominally protected. The diagram on the right is our river system in Ireland, and the red shows you the number of river bodies that are at risk of failing to meet good ecological status. Now, that looks to me like nearly every water body in the country. Now, believe it or not, we're not actually the worst. England has zero rivers or water bodies in good ecological condition. We are actually better in that regard. But this is showing you that we are totally off track to even having the simplest basic human rights or rights for nature in terms of having clean water in our rivers. So this is why I think rewilding has to be central to our response and is critically important. Now, rewilding isn't just about plants and getting trees to grow, it's about animals. And here's just a selection of animals that we have lost in Ireland. And the golden eagle is back. It was reintroduced to Donegal a number of years ago. It's not doing very well because the landscape is so poor that there's not enough for the eagles to eat. So if you remember the time when the golden eagles were reintroduced, it was a very exciting moment. The golden eagles haven't expanded beyond Donegal. Having said that, we have had some successes. We've had a number of white-tailed eagles are back in Ireland. But we have to remember that Ireland had much more than that. We had bears, we had wolves, we had wild boar, we had lynx. And these played a role. They weren't just... They weren't there to, be charismatic megafauna for television programs. These animals play an important role in the ecosystem. Now, sometimes we don't know what that role is. There's an awful lot that we don't know about biodiversity. And just because something is big doesn't necessarily mean that it plays an important role. We know that very small things in our world play hugely important roles. Think about mosquitoes, think about ants, think about amoebic dysentery, and you'll know that small things can be very powerful in the scheme of things. And so we recognise that we don't know everything, but we do know that these species play an important role. Now, I know that bringing bears back to Ireland really does seem like a stretch target. But I think it's still important to recognise that this animal was here. If I go down to the Burren today, the Burren probably has the greatest collection of archaeological remains of brown bears in Ireland. They're all over the place. I remember being brought as a child to the Allowee Caves and just wowed by the fact that there were bears in this place. Yet if I go to the Burren National Park today and I go to the Visitor Centre in Kilfenora, which is a lovely place, the first thing that I'll see is a goat. And I won't see any mention of bears. And I wonder what has happened to it. Why have we dislocated ourselves so much from the wild nature that's there? And I think I kind of know the answer in a way. And I think because it's much more palatable to go in and see a goat rather than seeing a brown bear, it's probably less threatening. Now, Ireland has a big problem with climate change. Ireland has a big problem with greenhouse gas emissions. And one of the biggest emitters of greenhouse gases is our land. And the problem is getting worse because our forests, even the Sitka spruce, are stores of carbon. And because we haven't been establishing new forests over the last decades, as those plantations are being harvested, the volume of carbon is shrinking. And so of all the sectors in our greenhouse gas pie, as it were, the land use sector is looking the most worrying because it looks like it's going to increase quite substantially. And another big source of greenhouse gases in Ireland is from these degraded bogs, these drained peatlands. Now, the Environmental Protection Agency has looked at this, and they have said that in order to get to net zero in our land use by 2050, we need to do a couple of things. We need to reduce the number of ruminant animals in this country. It said our cow population needs to be reduced by about 30%. We need to re-wet all of our bogs. That's about 20% of the country. And we need to increase drastically the amount of forest to about 20-25% of the country. When that report came out, which was an academic exercise, it wasn't a policy document, it was an academic exercise, it was denounced by a certain rural politician as amounting to ethnic cleansing. This is the atmosphere around the debate about land use in Ireland. But at least it gave us a picture about the kind of Ireland that we need to be striving towards. This is an example of a bog in the Midlands that has been mined out by maybe the horticulture industry or by Bord na Móna. Bord na Móna has stopped mining peat. If you go back to many of these places today, this is what it'll look like. I can guarantee you nobody went out and planted cotton grass. These plants just established themselves. The drains were blocked, the water came flooding back in, the seeds were floating around in the air, and nature heals itself. And then a number of years ago, we got what I think is one of the most remarkable rewilding success stories we've ever seen in Ireland. And this was the return of the common crane, which had gone extinct in Ireland in the 1700s. And an absolutely magnificent bird. It's one of our biggest birds we've ever had. It's about 1.5 meters tall. They're incredibly loud. I heard one in a field in Roscommon once, and I thought someone was out strangling babies again. When this bird flew up out of the grass, and it was absolutely incredible. The last couple of years, we know for a fact that a pair of cranes, of all the places in Ireland, they picked one of these Bord na Móna bogs where they hadn't done any work. They had actually just pulled the gate behind them and walked away, and the cranes decided this is where they were going to raise a family. And we hear stories about how, because this has happened in a number of places now, the cranes are coming back by themselves. We probably have more than maybe two or three nesting pairs of cranes now in Ireland after hundreds of years. And there was no reintroduction, there was no reports, there was no feasibility. It cost precisely €0 for this to happen. And it shows just the amazing regenerative power of nature, which completely fills me with hope. Now, it doesn't mean that for the return of all our species that this is going to be the path. We do need intervention. Now, is rewilding happening in Ireland? So I think my story about the cranes kind of says, yes, it is happening in Ireland. If you look at what's called the Forest Inventory Report, this is a survey that comes out periodically from the Department of Agriculture about the extent of forests in Ireland. And the last one was maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And they reported that our forest estate had increased. So now when you're talking to the Department of Agriculture about forests, they're mostly talking about plantations. But because with satellite technology and so on, we can get a good picture about where tree cover is expanding. And one of the areas where they found that tree cover had expanded most rapidly was on the bogs where peat mining had stopped. Birch trees, willow trees had simply blown in and become established. And again, this cost us absolutely nothing. The government 2 years ago introduced a forest strategy, and they put €3.2 billion into it, which I'd have no problem with if it was going to work, but it hasn't worked in the years. It has satisfied nobody. Because it was based largely on the assumption that people would still want to plant Sitka spruce, and the timber industry is going to want Sitka spruce into the future. And it's not working. And yet, when we do nothing, in the right circumstances, trees will become established. So I would say that rewilding is happening. Although it's not being called rewilding, I think there is a fear in certain circles about using the word rewilding. And people have to work in the environments that they live in, and that's fine. I was in Glenveigh National Park last year, and they are now, if you've ever been to Glenveigh, there's a magnificent valley where the castle is, and it's where most of the visitors go. And there's about 1,000 hectares in that valley. And they now have a woodland strategy to restore oak forest in that valley, and they're not planting trees. Now, they are planting trees, but the plan is not based on planting trees. The plan is about reducing the deer density to the point where trees can plant themselves. And this is the most effective way of reforesting. As Eoghan pointed out on his trip to Costa Rica, Costa Rica is one of a few countries, there are a few, that have drastically reforested their country over the 19th and 20th centuries. None of them have done it with planting trees. They have all done it through natural regeneration. So rewilding is happening in Glenveigh and Donegal, and I think that's great. But rewilding isn't happening enough. We've had some of what I would call flop examples. This is Wild Neffen in Mayo, and in 2013, Enda Kenny cycled up on his bicycle, and they unveiled this great sign like it was Jurassic Park. This was going to be Ireland's wilderness area. And then they all went home and congratulated themselves and did absolutely nothing. And that is over 10 years ago now, and this is one of the most expansive peat landscapes in Ireland. And what you will see if you go there is just lodgepole pine and Sitka spruce to the horizon. Now, there is an area which was the original national park, which is Blanket Bog, and it's destroyed with sheep. And all these years on, we haven't got to the point where we see nature as being a worthy investment. So like the staff in the national park here would say, if only we got the staff and the money, we could get rid of all of these conifers and rewild this area. And that hasn't happened. In the areas where the sheep are, the people in the national park would love to get rid of the sheep, but the sheep are coming in from surrounding farms. The national park have to be good neighbours. They could round up the sheep and send them to the slaughterhouse. That wouldn't make them very popular. As it is, the people in the national park say they have never been popular. I was told this summer when I visited Wild Neffen that the old acronym for NPWS, which is the National Parks and Wildlife Service, was No People West of the Shannon. And that tells you an awful lot about how the structures, not necessarily how people see nature, but how the structures we have built around nature conservation are seen by local people in these areas. So that's why, as much as I love rewilding, as much as I would love for people to go with a flag with a big oar on it and say, we're going to do rewilding here, there is a backlash, and there's a good reason for that. But and I think that's because the state has failed so abysmally in giving people any sense of power or ownership over their local landscapes. And the conifers in Neffen actually are a tremendous example, because particularly in the coming out of the Second World War, 50s, 60s, 70s, this area was being drained of people. People were just emigrating. And at the time, the state thought this was a great example, a great way to bring employment to an area. We'll turn it into a plantation forest. There'll be sawmills and there'll be other economies springing up. So they put huge effort into draining this enormous landscape. Like, you can imagine the labor that went into it at the time, and planting all of these trees. And then, of course, the trees never grew. They never became commercially successful. So there was no forest industry coming out of it. And then the people today are living with this chronically degraded landscape, and they've basically been abandoned by the government, who refuse to see the need for the investment or to come and do the work that's necessary in it. So I do think we have to acknowledge why there is a backlash against things like rewilding and the nature restoration law, because nature conservation hasn't delivered anything for people in rural areas. And farmers still don't have options available to them. I often say to people, I've never met a sheep farmer who enjoys farming sheep, They hate them. They're a huge amount of work with no return. Half the sheep die from one end of the year to the next. That's why if you go up to Wicklow, the only wildlife you'll see are the ravens. The ravens have done really well from eating the dead sheep. So there's an animal welfare issue, there's an environmental issue, and yet nobody has the honesty to say to farmers, this isn't working, we're going to set up something else. Farm, yes, in nature-friendly ways, which we know we can do. Rewilding, yes, because we know there's a desperate need for it, and we're going to be here to support you. We're going to pay you for this, just the way we pay you for the sheep. Yet we haven't got to the point in our politics, in our public discussion. I go back to that politician saying that this amounted to ethnic cleansing. We haven't got there as a society yet where we can talk about these things. Incidentally, this is on the drive up to Wild Neffin, where there is actually rewilding. And you can pull in and you can see beautiful oak trees and ferns and all kinds of things spontaneously emerging from the fields. But if you talk to local people, they don't see anything wonderful about that. They might remember the farmer who was there. They might see the house that's now derelict, the family that isn't there, the young people that aren't there. So I think our challenge as ecologists, and I think people in this room probably will agree with me when I say we need to rewild. But really what our challenge is, we need to make this work for people. We need to be able to go into these communities, be able to explain to them what it is we want to do, why it's important, and what the supports are going to be there to do that, so that we can go from what I think is a declining landscape in every sense of the word, economically, socially, environmentally, to one that is thriving, to one that is seeing, facing into the challenge of climate and biodiversity with energy and enthusiasm, because it's bringing people back. It means more economic activity. It means schools opening, because people want to live in landscapes like this that are diverse, also in every sense of the word. So that's why, looking at pictures like that, different people see different things. And I think it's important to acknowledge that. Now, I have 6 minutes left. So I'm going to spend my last 6 minutes talking about a project that I started this year. Actually started last year, but I kind of launched it this year. When I worked with the Irish Wildlife Trust, those glory days, we were, I think, one of the few champions of rewilding in Ireland, certainly at the NGO level. We were campaigning not just to make rewilding popular, we were campaigning to get the policies in place that would recognise the importance of rewilding and get the supports in place. As a consequence, we were getting a lot of phone calls from people saying, I have a bit of land, I want to rewild, how do I do it? And you can't just tell somebody over the phone what they need to do. Because every bit of land in Ireland is different, and every landowner is different. And people have different mindsets, different expectations, and so on. So in order to really guide somebody, and again, I'm not telling people what to do with their land, we're guiding towards rewilding. You have to go and meet them, and you have to walk the land with them, and you have to get a sense of their priorities and the context that they're working in. So I have set up this website. It's called Rewild Your Land. It's a free service to landowners, and people send me their an image of their land, where it is, and what it looks like from an aerial point of view. We have a little chat about whether rewilding is really what they want to do, because a lot of people say, I really want to rewild, and I'm going to dig a pond here, and I'm going to plant 1,000 trees over here, and then I'm going to have barn owl boxes and kestrel boxes, and it's everything everywhere all at once. And I'm kind of saying, okay, let's slow down. What does the land want? If the land could speak, what would it tell us that it wants to be? And sometimes the answer is not a pond or bird boxes, and sometimes it is. And I think what... I really want to emphasise that there's lots of things that people can do for nature. They're not all rewilding. That doesn't make them bad things. But I do think that in terms of pollinator plans, in terms of farming for nature, those things are well served in Ireland. There's already websites and lots of guidance and stuff like that. There was nothing there for anybody who really wanted to rewild. So that's basically my motivation for it. Now, sorry, going back, I thought I had a photograph, but I now have, I think I have 20 landowners. I can't remember. I'm only about like 150 hectares maybe in total rewilding, and a lot of it is about helping landowners chart a way forward so that they will be on a journey towards rewilding. So, for instance, and this happens so much in Ireland. We go to somewhere and there are too many deer for rewilding to happen because the deer will eat not only all the trees, but like deer will eat all of the flowering plants. Deer will eat fungi. They'll completely strip everything out. So what you will end up is just a grassy field. Again, it goes back to why doing nothing really isn't an option. So we're having conversations with people on how to shoot deer and who can we get to shoot enough deer to get trees to grow on this land. Sometimes it's about blocking drains. I had an example. I was in Wexford earlier this year, and the farmer who wanted to rewild had a field beside an estuary, and in the winter, wintering geese come from Greenland and eat the grass. So we thought, well, rewilding maybe isn't a good idea in this place, because if you rewilded this area, then the geese would be driven off that land. So we agreed that doing what you were doing, he was grazing animals, was the better option for it. So I also want to emphasise that I don't believe that rewilding is the be-all and end-all. I just think that it's really, really important, and it needs to be firmly part of our plans. I also, and I'll just finish on this note, I'm often told that I want to turn the country into a national park and release wolves, and sometimes I do, but we have so little wild space in Ireland that doubling it, trebling it, quadrupling it is still only going to be a tiny little part of our country. There's still room for livestock farming. I mean, I don't advocate for eradicating livestock farming, but we have to get real about the challenges we face that are interlinked, whether that's health, whether that is our food system, and whether that is the nature crisis and our water crisis. And it's going to mean greater balance in our countryside. So, if you were to ask me, like, how much of Ireland should be rewilded? Well, it's probably somewhere between 30 and 50%. And I think we could quite easily get to 50% of Ireland space for nature, on land. Probably even more at sea, I would say. Without eradicating farming, by having more diverse farming systems, still having farm animals, sheep, maybe if they're behind a fence, horticulture, fruit, nuts, all of those kinds of things, because it's not just that farmers are not being paid for nature. They're not being paid for a diverse food system. We know that horticulture farmers are basically down to double digits in Ireland. They're being put out of business. So the system we have basically we have a system that pays for livestock, and we need to pull our way back from that. But I think it's absolutely doable. But as maybe my talk has demonstrated, we have, in some ways, we've won the political, we've won the public fight for this. I think a lot of people see the need for it, but we haven't won that political battle for it. So there's still a lot of work to be done, but perseverance, we'll keep going. So thank you very much.
Yes, we'll now have a half an hour for Q&A. The Q&A will be led by Kieran Flood from the Irish Wildlife Trust.
The question I'll identify myself, I'm Mary's brother, but it's a question for Pádraic, the political battle, Pádraic. We have the powering on at the moment. Who is leading the political battle for the environment? Taking on
the IFA and the ICMSA. You talk about a political battle. That's talk, but is anybody doing anything about it?
Not really, no. And it can be very dispiriting to see how the agriculture ministers in particular come and go, but they all say the same thing. It's like someone pulls a string at their back and they start babbling about our sustainable food system and how we're the best in the world at this, that, and the other. And it's all shockingly dishonest. I listened to Charlie McConnell, who was our last, the agriculture minister before this, at a time when the nitrates derogation was being discussed. And this is, I don't know how much you know, but this is a huge threat to dairy farmers. They're threatened with lowering the amounts of manure getting spread. But the interviewer was asked the minister, should we be preparing for losing the nitrates derogation altogether? And the minister said, no, we shouldn't. So you have to despair, like why? And a lot of farmers listen to that and going, to hell with that, I'm preparing for losing all this stuff. So farmers, if you read the farming newspapers, it's full of uncertainty, it's full of anxiety, it's full of denialism, and nobody is leading the political battle. The SAC Dems are the only ones who have come out explicitly to say, for instance, we need a totally new system, we need to do without the nitrates derogation, we need to totally rearrange everything. I haven't heard that from any other politician.
I actually don't think that the politicians are going to do anything. I think the change is coming from the ground up, and I see it with, like, say, Cooney Farlong in Wexford. The biggest farmer in Wexford is a regenerative farmer. And there's like little regenerative farming movements, and then the farming for nature, there's Tallaght Bio, there's Burren Bio. Like, the change is coming from within the farming community. That's the only way I think it's going to happen. But then, I know I disagree with you, I just don't think there's any point in engaging with the Feckers at all. But I do think the farmers themselves realise that there's no profit to be made in the way that they're farming. It's just constant inputs, and very little at the end of the day.
I won't hog the microphone, but just to say, the debate over the nature restoration law, which is so vexed in this country, was about giving farmers options so that they could do other things instead of just having sheep, for instance. And the farming organisations said, no, we don't want farmers having options. And that's where we're at, with particularly with farmer organisations.
The IFA call it up the doll, they're down to an office, apparently.
Yeah, I would have to slightly differ with Mary on what's happening within farming at the moment. I think I'm not seeing any kind of signs of change. I think there's a huge fear within farming to step out of line and for people to put their heads up above the parapet. And there is a problem there, and we need to be honest about that problem. But I think this is only going to change, and it all harks back to what I think we all touched on during our talks, which was offering farmers alternatives, because at the moment they just don't have them. And if you're a farmer and your livelihood, putting food on the table and paying your kids' college fees or whatever else, paying the bills, depends on farming, you cannot just say, well, I love nature and I want to do whatever, I want to do the right thing for nature with my land, unless you're given viable financial alternatives. And the way we have to start talking about this is that it's not a problem for farmers, it's a problem for society as a whole. And we are all responsible for placing farmers in that predicament that their only option is to kill nature, to carry on killing off nature, to be able to be able to carry on living. It's all of our fault. It's not farmers' fault. These are their only options as things stand. And until the rest of us come together and say, right, it's our responsibility as a society to change this in a way that does give farmers other options, things won't change.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. So, just before we jump into more questions, I didn't get a chance to tell you what the crack is. So we're here until 9 o'clock. So we're going to get through as many questions as we can. I've got a couple of small prompts and questions for the panel as well. And just to let you know who you're with, I'm Kieran Flood from the Irish Wildlife Trust. And this talk tonight is very important to us. Our organisation has 3 main pillars. So one of them is communities for nature, which is what we have in this room right now. It's people who care about nature, so we're really trying to encourage that. The other one is advocacy for nature, which is lobbying the government and communicating about trying to put pressure on the government to make change. And then the third is rewilding in Ireland, rewilding in practice. So this event is obviously kind of bringing all those 3 together. So thanks everyone for coming out, and the level of interest is fantastic. So yeah, we'll push ahead, and we have 1 mic roaming around. I'll ask the odd kind of prompting question, but we'll get through as many of yours as possible. So I think Fabiola has someone at the back there. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi guys, I just want to first of all thank you for this, and also to the 3 of you as individuals for inspiration. I have been managing my own land for biodiversity, and I can see a lot of faces around here I recognise who are doing the same. So thank you for being a wealth of inspiration and information for me over the last 2 years. I have managed to leave my corporate career and just this week fully move into an actual role in restoration. So, but my question is, I think it's mostly for possibly, sorry for, but my question is, I live in Wicklow, and I know in Wicklow there are, I'm in a WhatsApp group with 60 individuals and landowners who are restoring their land for biodiversity. And I got a lot of hope from that. I presume through Rewild Your Land and moving around the country, you've noticed that in every county, perhaps. Has anyone been mapping that in any sort of way? I know these are individual landowners, but what gravity does that individual landowners, because you tend to talk about as is right because they're farmers in Quilter are the biggest landowners. However, there does, I feel, seem to be a great upsurge in individuals managing their land for biodiversity. Do you gain part from that? And do you see in any way where those, to Mary's point of losing land patch by patch, are those patches starting to reconnect a little bit to individuals? So that's a very long question.
Well, hi Jack. Jack has a fantastic Instagram account if everyone wants to log on. So, I mean, one of the reasons that I launched Rewilding Land was because I wanted to show people that there are people around the country doing this, that there are individual landowners who are interested and willing to do it. And I think that is extremely encouraging. Another place, different place that we did in Wexford this year, a family inherited quite a large dairy farm, and they said to me, "We want to rewild it." And I said, "Well, all of it?" And they said, "Yeah." And I was saying, "Well, how did that go down with the neighbours?" And they said they were in total shock because once this person died, they all assumed that it would be on the market, and they were sniffing around, waiting for it to go to auction. And then they were in shock when they discovered that it wasn't going to be on sale. And very interestingly, this guy, he was youngish. His mother was there. His mother was an immigrant to the UK, and she was back. And I asked her, she had grown up in this particular house and on this farm. I said, "Well, how do you feel about this vision of it being rewilded. She said, "Oh, I think it's fantastic." She said the countryside of my youth was full of wildlife, and then it was all gone, and now I really hope it will be full of wildlife for the next generation. So I think there's great hope from individuals who are doing that, but it's not done in a coordinated way. No, we don't have any data on whether this stuff is connecting or whether it's contributing to anything. And I think there is a great opportunity that if we were to, let's say, throw nature reserves, the idea of nature reserves open to private landowners, say, make your land into a nature reserve. The government will help you, the government will give you funding to do that, and it can contribute to the national effort of getting to 30% by 2030 or something like that. I think that'd be great. But that idea was also floated, and it was also nixed by the government at the time.
Okay, we've got a mic down the front. So I'm going to have to pick who gets to speak. It's fun. Yeah, so I saw you first, so I will just mic you up.
Okay, thanks. It's a quick question, and maybe there's no answer to it, but this remote sensing, right? You can do an awful lot with satellite imagery from space. Is there a possibility of mapping the rewilded parts versus the non-rewilded parts and actually get a percentage? Like you're saying that there are individuals who are rewilding, that they're doing their best, they're doing sustainable farming, whatever. Can we image that as a particular, say, colour and get to an estimate? Like we actually don't have much data, because I'm hearing stories of so many people doing this, right? Individuals, but I've no concept of how many hectares it is, how connected it is, or anything like that. Surely there's a scientific, easy, way of fucking taking a picture and putting it together.
No, the quick answer is no. We don't even have an accurate figure for the amount of native woodland we have in Ireland. People say 1%, 2%. We never put the energy. There is a project underway to look at it, but we don't have figures.
And the other thing with the satellite imagery is it mightn't be always easy to tell the quality of the habitats, what species are in there and rewilded, like wild habitat versus maybe a forest cover. So, but maybe if the research was put into it, the people who specialise in that could figure out a way to do that too. Yeah. So we'll take a few more questions before I'll jump into a few other ones towards the end. Fabio's chosen someone, so yeah, go ahead. And we'll go over this side and then after that.
Well, I just wanted to ask about our national parks and our National Parks and Wildlife Service. Are they fit for purpose? My sense is that they are not. I know this is something that Eoghan has written about extensively, but I'm interested to hear what all three of you think. I think that we're missing a trick with our national parks. I think they could be regional centres of rewilding and healing biodiversity, and they could show our populace what that looks like tangibly in front of them.
Yeah, well, I would. So I live very near to Killarney National Park, and since I moved to Beara, which is 16 and a half years ago now, and I've seen my own place come wonderfully back to life. I've seen Killarney National Park, which is under the supposed management and care of the state, with all the resources behind it, continue to go downhill for the very same reasons as my place was dying off when I arrived. That is, invasive grazers in the form of goats and sika deer, and invasive plant species, primarily rhododendron. And what you see is just years and years and years go by, and people say, well, we're doing our best, and you can't be knocking them because they're doing their best, and nothing ever changes. And I've seen the same across all of our national parks. And if we're talking about, so Pádraic says that Glenveigh may be turning that corner. I'm not so convinced. I was up there a month or so ago, and it still looks very wrecked to me. I know that they have a management plan in place to reduce the deer population, but
somebody who I spoke to on the ground said he's not convinced that much is happening there. So Ireland has 8 national parks. The latest, the most recently constituted one was in the Dingle Peninsula, where I remember Saoirse McHugh and a couple of other people, David Smith of the Native Woodland Trust, were getting together. This large package of land had come on the market in Dingle of about 1,100 acres, which is very big by Irish standards, a contiguous area. And so their idea was, let's get the state to buy this land, declare it a national park, and rewild it. And they asked me would I, throw my voice behind that. And I said, well, yeah, I'd be delighted to, with the caveat that all our existing national parks are bits, and we should probably be putting our energy into sorting those out rather than getting new ones together. But at the same time, it was a good idea and a positive thing, so I did what I could. And lo and behold, about 6 months later, or whatever it was, the state did buy this piece of land. They did announce that they were going to, that it was being designated a national park, and that they were going to continue grazing sheep on it. So, this area is trashed because of sheep grazing. And that was what they said. That was what the minister at the time said, this is the right thing to do. And he had been clearly advised to do that by ecologists within the NPWS. What I would say, and Pádraic is a good man to talk to about this, I know that he's been going around all of Ireland's national parks talking to people. They won't talk to me, they see me as too kind of critical, so they want nothing to do with me. But what I would say, and I know that Pádraic would completely back this, is that the vast majority of NPWS personnel working on the ground are fantastic people. They're brilliant. They're really, really great. But there's severe dysfunction at the top. And I think what it boils down to is that they actually don't care. The people who are managing the NPWS, they don't care about the ecology, the nature. They're just playing some kind of a game, which is, it's power politics, whatever it is. It's not rocking the boat. They don't give a damn about the actual nature, and think that needs to change. And it's a real disappointment of the last governments that didn't happen, I would just say. But can I pass it over to Pádraic maybe to continue to also add on to Mary?
As someone said, I spent the last year going around all of our national parks. I visited all 8 of them, and I visited them with the personnel from the national parks and wildlife service, so I got to talk to them about what they were doing and what they weren't doing and all the plans. There are some areas where things have improved. So, for instance, Wicklow, if you're familiar with Wicklow Mountain National Park, last year was the first year they didn't have a fire in the park in maybe 20 years. I mean, Wicklow Mountains has been burned to the ground repeatedly. And a lot of work has gone into doing that. But at the same time, they couldn't tell me what the condition of the habitats were in Wicklow Mountains National Park. They had no survey information. This would be common for most of the national parks. They had no plan. There was no plan in place. There was no vision. They told me that they thought the level of sheep grazing in the park was sustainable, which I obviously didn't agree with. And so while they do have very good people, we have no legislation for national parks. So like what happened down in Kerry last year, where the state buys some land and they call it a national park, it doesn't actually mean anything because we have no legislation to define what that means. There's no system in place for making these management plans, for setting targets, for reporting and monitoring, for directing the investment towards. And therefore you get you get very good people doing their best day to day without these structures in place. So so it's very variable what happens. But I totally agree with you that the national park should be the spearhead of our response to the biodiversity crisis. It's publicly owned land, it's owned by you and me. And if the state can't get their act together to do what needs to be done in our national parks, well then there's no hope for convincing anybody else, because the farmers and the other state bodies are kind of looking, going, well, why should we be doing anything when the national parks over at the other side of the hill still have to pay stuff with deer and stuff with sheep, and I'm doing very much about it. So, but I mean, I would hold out hope. I think things have changed, but without the legislation, I think it's very hard to make the progress that we need to make on them. Do you want to say anything on national parks?
Thank you, Mary. I'll go at the end of the US as well. That's a really nice idea, though, of national parks being like a centre to promote rewilding, because as Pádraic just said, it's still on land, so you don't have the same barriers that maybe you have in other areas in terms of land use and livestock and things. So there probably is no reason why, well, obviously there's some logistical changes needed, but why we couldn't use our national parks as a sort of a flagship space to promote rewilding, wild spaces for nature.
Totally, and just briefly, something I was trying to get around to saying during my talk, in Wild Neffen, where they have the problem with sheep, the people in the national park would like to get rid of the sheep, but they can't without the cooperation of the Department of Agriculture. They would need the Department of Agriculture to go and speak to those farmers and tell them the problem and penalise them if needs be, because the sheep are trespassing. But the Department of Agriculture have no interest. And the Department of Agriculture really, I know we need to talk about National Parks and Wildlife Service, but the Department of Agriculture spends billions of public money on farm subsidies, on forest subsidies. They control all of the fishing that goes on around our coast. And they actually have an awful lot, they could be doing an awful lot more for our biodiversity problems, and they're really just interested in expanding beef and dairy, is all they're focused on. They have no research station in the uplands, for instance, Department of Agriculture.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll go back to the floor in a second, but just before we run out of time, I have a quick one as well. So the name of this talk was Theory, Practice, Scale, and so really we're trying to figure out ways we can, different scales we can rewild on, and ways we can do better in the rewilding world. And some of your talk, Mary, you mentioned stuff, sort of a scale where we can start is with the self, and I think the points we've been talking about already are probably the most important. Like, we need systematic change at a political level and in departments such as agriculture. But it'd just be interesting to quickly touch on that, because you say it very well, like, you know, if you're going to give out about it and you're going to want people to do it, you've got to look after your own patch. So it's really, I think this room has probably already made the change, but it's that change of systems thinking and seeing the more complex problems and that you can do something about it. So do you get any pushback when you tell people they need to change what they're doing? Because we all need to change the paradigm, because it's such a big problem here, and so the work you're doing is really kind of promoting that. So, like, do you find people like being told they have to change the way they see the world? Because messy needs to be seen as good, and people, if we want to survive this and let nature come back, we need to take a step back. So just if you could touch on that, it'd be interesting. Do you get people like shocked and horrified, or how does it go?
Yeah, no, mostly people hate me. But,
making lots of friends.
They also don't really understand what I mean. And so there's a wonderful TG series that we've just finished filming, which is an Ark makeover series. And so that will be coming out later this year, which I hope will start to get the idea across. Like, it's not abandonment. You know, it's still a garden in a sense, but it's just that it's an extra layer where you're looking at how can I be of support rather than how can I have a nice outdoor room, you know. And the thing that we always forget to talk about is that everything is connected, because the collapse of society is simply reflected in the collapse of the natural world. And I'm sure, like everyone in this room, you've had periods of time in your life when you know, things are not going well. And, you know, I remember those times and not having money to keep going, you know, and I didn't care about nature in those times, like, and I think so many people these days, I mean, that's the last thing on their mind, really, you know. It's more about putting food on the table, trying to get to the end of the week, you know, and everything is connected, so really we need a reboot of the whole system. It's a systems change we need, like it's total systems change. It's the end of capitalism, and it is an ending. But there will be a beginning if we do something. And if we don't, then we are in serious trouble. But I don't want to depress you too much.
We've got a little bit more time left to get maybe some more positive things. But yeah, that's what's needed, and that's why I wanted to touch on that question, because I think everyone in here is interested in the topic, but we need to sort of figure out ways of helping other people see it differently and try and make that change. So we'll try and get a few more questions in. We can probably stay a little bit after 9. If you need to leave to get a bus or anything, it's okay if you walk out. Rupert had a question ready up here. We won't get to them all, but we'll get to a few more now. Go ahead.
Thanks to you for your commitment and energy to share knowledge and experience. It's been amazing watching you for the last few years. I live in kind of a small microcosm of all the things that you're saying in a peninsula, Portrane in County Dublin in Fingal, where we've got an old psychiatric hospital that's HSE land that soon, I hear, is being handed over to Fingal County Council. So we've got quite a lot of people there who there's roads being built. There's red laurel in the forest that they're cutting down, on the road right beside it they're planting it. There's lots of all this stuff going on. What I'm wondering is, given that, I suppose locally in my community, not many people have given the local politician the mandate to go fight for climate. Number one, I don't see it as a general comment by anybody at the door, and that's our first problem. The government is shaped off what people and you'd hope society wants, so we're not hearing it too often. So is there that TG Cara series? I'm really excited to hear about that, because that'll get it into the mindsets a little bit more. Is there a campaign that could be done and run nationally in order to get these issues into people's minds and see to start joining these dots? And secondly, is there, two big questions maybe pick one of them. But secondly, is there any example of public lands, local authority lands being chosen and taken from what is an ecological ruin? Like we've got salt marshes, we've got meadows, planted meadows with I don't know what. We've got coastline, we've got forests that are conifer, and then we've got replanted forest, which again are native species, but I don't know where they've come from. So is there an example of that kind of land that's been handed to local authority, and is there a chance of lobbying that local authority to turn it into a rewilded space? Is there any examples of that around Ireland?
I don't know any.
Yeah, I don't. Turvey, I believe, haven't been there, I have to admit, but Turvey is near enough Portrane, and I believe the council have been doing a lot of work there. I think a lot of them, sometimes they do have land, and but it's very much about following government guidelines about planting trees to create a forest. I don't know any who are rewilding. It is in the Fingal Development Plan to promote rewilding. It's one of the few official documents you'll see the word. And they have a very good biodiversity team in Fingal, so better than many places, but I don't know any. Do you know any in your area? No.
Okay, we do need to leave quite soon, so I don't think we can actually take any more questions from the floor, which is very annoying. Sorry we didn't have enough time. We tried to fit in the speakers and the questions, but before we do, maybe a few more thoughts from the speakers, though, to finish on. So I mentioned there that, and people from the floor and others have mentioned that we need a sort of systematic change. So maybe if the three of you want to have a think and say what's something, like what rewilding means to you and what we can do to try and drive that in Ireland. We didn't have time to get into examples of other places where we can see best practice. But yeah, if all three of us can just touch on that, like what's the importance of rewilding to you and what can we do about it? So, and not necessarily what you can do by going home and planting something in the garden, because we know we can all do that. It's more like other ideas, who we can support or what we can make noise about when we leave the room, basically. So, yeah, we'll finish with those thoughts.
I'd say there's so much that people can do, and no matter who you are and what your skills are and your strengths and whatever else, you have a role to play. in this fight, and it really is the fight of our lifetimes, is defending nature and bringing back nature. And I think, you know, when you look at how you affect change, how you bring societal change regarding something like this, it really comes back to stories and stories of hope. And when people see the difference that can be made, that's when something clicks in their minds and they start to say, okay, there is another way. And a really great example of that is very close to where we're sitting, which is what Trinity College has done in College Green, where I know it's only tiny little areas and some people don't like it, they think it looks wild, but it's challenging that mindset, what Mary was talking about so eloquently earlier, where we've been sucked into this this idea that the land has to be completely dominated and controlled. So, you know, that is starting to crack, and it's happening through small stories and examples of how it doesn't need to be that way, and that's where we need to look to for hope.
You go, I can't.
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo that as well. And I mean, by turning up tonight, you have all done something and done something really important. So, you know, I think we're not passive by any means. And the great thing about rewilding in nature in general, I find it's such a healing thing. It's such an inspiring thing. It's such a restorative thing that we don't have to, you know, it can be on the canal or by the coast or something like that. So it in many ways it's more accessible than many of the awful challenges in the world today, and it can be very rewarding. But thank you all here for turning up, because that's very inspiring for me and maybe the others as well.
Okay, there is a couple of things you can do. You can go to all your local garden centres and you can say, "Come on, lads, where are the native plants?" You know. You can check whether those plant passports actually mean they've been grown in Ireland, or have they been imported from abroad and have been sitting on Irish soil for long enough so that they can label them as grown in Ireland. That's how all the diseases are coming in. You can go to your local councils. They always listen to the lowest common denominator because they're the only ones who complain. So go and harass them and say, what's the crack with these parks? We need loads of community growing spaces. We need to give access to land. We need to get people back onto the land. This green narrative that we need to pile everybody into cities is not a good narrative. We need people woven back into the landscape as guardians, you know, and access to land is a major problem for a lot of people. So councils can help by providing access to community growing spaces, all those brownfield sites, industrial sites, all these dead zones that are parks. They need to become hubs for communities again, because we need to rebuild communities because we've all been broken apart. And that's where the hope lies, is in the local rebuilding of communities on all levels. So that's where you'll get your hope, I think.
Thanks, Mary, and thanks, Pádraic, and thanks, Eoghan. Thank you to the Trinity Centre for Environmental Humanities for doing this collaboration with us. We have 2 more talks in the collaboration. We'll be speaking about rewilding in Scotland next month, and if you go on to Eventbrite now and search for that, you can book on already. So 20th of October, Rewilding in Scotland, back here in Trinity College, Dublin, with the same great collaborators. So thank you to the Irish Wildlife Trust staff who helped make this happen today, and to Jamie from our board, and I'll just hand you back to Fletcher.
Yeah, just thank you all for coming. It was really inspirational, and I think to see just how much interest there is in this topic. The next talk, Rewilding in Scotland, I think building probably on some of the themes that Eoghan mentioned, will take place on the 20th of October in the Trinity Long Room Hub. You're all very much invited to join. Look out for the announcements. And a big thanks to Jamie Rowe, who is a postdoctoral fellow here in Trinity College Dublin, who, together with Kieran, has been behind this amazing series. Thank you.
All right. Good night, everybody. Take care.